यदि आप ये वीडियो हिंदी में देखना पसंद करेंगे, डिस्क्रिप्शन में दी गई लिंक पर जाएं। Jai Hind, my fellow brothers and sisters of India. Today, I come before you with a heartfelt and urgent plea to address an overlooked yet massive burden our economy carries, a staggering rupees 6.7 lakh crore in pension liabilities. This burden comes from the exploitative, unsustainable, and unfair old pension scheme, a system we have inherited from British India times and have allowed to grow unchecked. The central and state government of India are using the hard-earned money of 140 crore taxpayers to fund the retirement pensions of just 1 crore government employees. If left unchecked, this cost could explode from 6.7 lakh crore in 2023 to a whopping 400 lakh crore, that is 4 crore crores by 2050, leaving little to no room for development of healthcare, infrastructure, and education, imposing an enormous tax burden on all citizens. Historically, pension liabilities have grown at a rate of 23%, while government revenues have only grown by 14%. If this trend persists, pension liabilities could reach 50% of government revenue as early as 2040, posing a significant risk to fiscal stability and development priorities. Before we proceed, let me explain how the OPS is rooted in the exploitative policies of British India. During colonial times, the British East India Company guaranteed 50% of the last drawn salary as pension for its officials, funded by the taxes of our oppressed forefathers. This policy was designed for a privileged few at the expense of the masses. In April 2004, our policymakers had the foresight to end this exploitative system by introducing the National Pension System or the New Pension Scheme, a defined contribution model that was both inclusive and sustainable. However, we are now witnessing a dangerous reversal. 5 states have reverted to the old pension scheme, and the central government's unified pension scheme is expected to be rolled out nationwide on 1st of April 2025. The UPS may seem different, but it shifts only 25% of the pension's burden to government employees' contributions. Like the OPS, it remains economically unsustainable, unfair, and exploitative of the taxpayers' money. Don't just take my word for it. Experts across the spectrum, including Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, ex-RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan, TV Somanathan, Aditya Kuvalekar, and others have strongly opposed defined benefit policies. For a healthy economy, we must move from these defined benefit schemes to defined contribution schemes to ensure that the pension burden does not fall on the shoulders of taxpayers and our future generations. What is the difference between a defined benefit scheme and defined contribution scheme, you ask? In a defined contribution scheme, employees and employers contribute to a retirement fund that grows through investments and is withdrawn upon retirement, ensuring sustainability and individual responsibility. In contrast, a defined benefit scheme guarantees fixed inflation-adjusted payouts during retirement, often relying on taxpayer money to fill any shortfalls in the retirement fund, making it economically unsustainable over time. Pension and social security in old age are undeniably important. In fact, Articles 41 and 46 of our Constitution mandate the government to provide public assistance in cases of old age, sickness, disability, and weaker sections of the society. Schemes like the National Pension System, Atal Pension Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Health, Life, and Accident Insurance Yojanas ensures social security for all citizens, not just a select few. However, the old pension scheme and unified pension scheme are unconstitutional because they provide generous social security only to a small exclusive group funded by the taxes of 140 crore Indians. Comparing these schemes with the private sector, organized and unorganized, shows glaring inequities in job security, employers' contribution to retirement fund, family security during premature death, and financial stability in old age. Let us talk about the financial impact of allowing such unsustainable schemes to continue on our economy. I have filed RTIs with the Finance Ministry seeking projections for the next 50 years for three things. Firstly, an estimate of how the pension liabilities were growing versus the government revenue. Secondly, historical data on pension paid to retirees and families and their age groups. And thirdly, the expected fund performance under Unified Pension Scheme to account for the inflation-adjusted guaranteed payouts during retirement. From my calculation, the government's current estimate of a 28.5 contribution falls short. It would require at least 35 to 40% contributions to fulfill 50% of inflation-adjusted last drawn salaries obligations. Currently, pension expenses account for 13% of central and state government's revenue, but this could rise to a staggering 80% by 2050. Alarmingly, some states are already spending more than 50% of their revenue and in extreme cases 200% on pensions alone. And how is government planning to bridge this gap, you ask? Through higher taxes on its citizens. Over the past decade, we have seen significant tax increases on the front of fuel costs, passenger vehicle taxes, long-term capital gain taxes, GST slabs being increased, and GST being introduced on essentials like health insurance and term insurance. After launching the Unified Pension Scheme, Our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi tweeted that it ensures dignity and financial security for government employees. It is sad and ironic that the government has failed to see the bigger picture here. Financial security in retirement of taxpayers who also contribute significantly to national progress has been undermined by increasing long term capital gain taxes and health insurance taxes. We are stuck in a vicious cycle where government's posterity with respect to expenditure leads us to more taxes, higher cost of goods and inflation, fiscal deficit, a weaker rupee against dollar, and leading again to more expenditure. In 1975, the combined direct and indirect tax rates in India reached an astonishing 97%. If the current trajectory of fiscal imbalance and unchecked spending continues, we risk seeing a similarly high taxes as early as 2035, something we must act to prevent for the sake of sustainable economic growth. Government can turn this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle by demonstrating austerity with respect to expenditure. Lower expenditure will lead to lower taxes, lower cost of goods and services, lower fiscal deficit, a stronger rupee, hence boosting lower expenditure for the next year, leaving more in the hands of citizens like you and me. Despite being replaced by the NPS in 2004, the OPS was never fully eradicated. It remains in place for groups like armed forces, MLAs, and certain high ranking government employees. While their contribution to the nation are undeniable, uncertainty of life exists in all professions today. In fact, every year, more than 1 lakh Indians, including laborers, blue collar and gig workers, and professionals, lost their lives while on duty, contributing to nation building due to workplace accidents. It is only fair to extend social security to all citizens, not just select few groups. Like Article 370, the Police Act of 1861, and the Indian Penal Code of 1860, the Defined Benefit Pension Scheme is another exploitative relic of colonial era policies that no longer align with modern India's aspirations for fairness and progress. It is time to replace it with sustainable and equitable alternatives. State governments are allocating disproportionately high portions of their budgets to pensions at the expense of critical sectors like healthcare, infrastructure, and education. This runs counter to the directive principles of state policy, which emphasize equitable resource distribution and economic welfare to achieve sustainable development goals. We must question whether this is the vision our freedom fighters had for an independent and democratic India, one that serves the collective good rather than a privileged minority. We are in a democracy which is by the people and of the people. But is it for the people? I have approached the Prime Minister's office, the Finance Ministry, and even the Supreme Court, urging them to adopt a defined contribution pension system for all. Without a legal framework, future governments will continue reverting to unsustainable schemes for political gains, undoing past 2 decades of fiscal discipline. The Congress and Aam Aadmi Party have frequently promised the reintroduction of old pension scheme to gain political support, raising concerns about the potential for a nationwide rollback to these unsustainable policies. If unchecked, pension liabilities could surpass government revenues as early as 2050, placing an untenable burden on future generations. To ensure fiscal governance, we must establish a legal framework that prevents disproportionate expenditure on unsustainable social security schemes for short term political gains. History offers clear warnings from countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Argentina, Greece, Venezuela, and many more where poor budgetary decisions have led to severe economic crisis. India must not follow the same path. My fellow brothers and sisters of India, I urge you to advocate for an inclusive, fair, and sustainable social security system by voicing your concerns to local MPs and MLAs, the PMO, and the Supreme Court, and writing to newspapers, media houses, and publishing on social media voicing your concerns. We need to spread awareness regarding this issue and request from the central and state governments that social security schemes be inclusive and accessible to all citizens, sustainable, that is, defined contribution, not defined benefit, equal contribution ratios from employees and employers, and finally, have an option to opt out for those who don't need pensions. This is a humble and sincere plea to our political leaders, bureaucrats, and citizens to put emotions aside and address this issue economically. Together, we can reform our pension system and ensure a brighter future for India. India has a unique opportunity to lead the world in equitable and sustainable pension reform, much like its leadership in digital governance, UPI, low cost healthcare, and space technology. This is a moment to showcase visionary governance and position India as a global pioneer, becoming a Vishwaguru in effective and inclusive economic policies. If you are passionate about advocating for sustainable pension reforms and equitable social security policies, I invite you to join this effort by filling out the form provided in the description below. Together, we can work towards a fair and inclusive system for all. Jai Hind.